The river crashed against him, cold and relentless, as he stood waist-deep, clutching the limp body of a cat. Her fur was soaked, clinging to her fragile frame, and her paw hung at a sharp, unnatural angle, streaked with blood. His arms shook, fingers stiff from the icy water, but he held her tighter, forcing himself to move through the punishing current. Every step felt like a battle, his breath quick and sharp in his chest. Then, just as he lifted her higher to keep her above the water, something small moved against her back. He froze, staring closer. Tiny shapes clung to her drenched fur, newborn kittens, barely alive, their claws dug in, their tiny bodies shivering with the last bits of strength they had. Panic twisted through him as he realized what that meant, and how little time they all had left. The man tightened his grip as the current pulled harder, trying to steady himself against the freezing water. His breath caught when he realized what clung to the mother. Several tiny kittens, no bigger than his palm, their claws hooked weakly into her wet fur. Their eyes were still shut, their tiny bodies trembling, and his chest tightened at the sight. The mother was barely holding on, and now these helpless babies too. His heart pounded as he tried to gather them, fingers clumsy from the cold. The river rose higher, biting at his legs, cruel and fast. One kitten slipped loose, sliding into the black water. Panic surged through him as he lunged, catching it just before it disappeared. His foot nearly gave way, the current almost sweeping him under, but he clung tighter. His arms shook, his hands numb, but he refused to let go, not now. His foot finally struck solid ground, and he stumbled onto the muddy bank, collapsing to his knees with the cat and her kittens pressed against his chest. His body shook from cold and fear, but he kept them wrapped tightly in his arms, shielding them from the wind. The mother let out the faintest meow, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to meet his before closing again. He glanced down at the kittens, tiny and soaked but still breathing, their fragile chests rising against his jacket. Relief surged through him, but it was edged with dread. They weren't safe yet. Blood streaked his hands, his knees scraped raw, but he forced himself upright. Whispering shaky promises to the little family, he tightened his hold and began running, every step heavy but driven by a growing determination to get them to safety. The air in the clinic was warm, almost too warm, but it felt like life. The mother cat lay on a soft towel beneath glowing heat lamps, her body still but breathing, the kittens curled close beside her, cleaned and wrapped in tiny blankets. The man stood motionless, hands trembling as he watched. The vet glanced up and gave him a small, knowing smile, nodding once. They'd make it, because of him. Relief swept through him, quiet but powerful, as the mother weakly lifted her head and nudged one of her babies with her nose. His chest tightened. Slowly, he reached out, his finger brushing the damp fur on her head. She leaned into the touch. Tears stung his eyes as he felt warmth returning to her body, and in that fragile moment, gratitude and faith began to grow inside him like something newly alive. Later, in the quiet of the waiting room, he sat with one of the kittens nestled in his palm, its tiny chest rising and falling with soft, steady breaths. He stared down at it, thinking about how close they'd all come to being lost, how easily he could have kept walking, never noticing the river that day. But he hadn't. And now, this fragile little family had a chance. Across the room, the mother cat slowly lifted her head and met his eyes. For a long moment, something passed between them, silent but strong, a quiet understanding. He smiled through tears that blurred his vision, feeling something inside him shift and soften, a weight lifting. He knew, without a doubt, he would never forget this day, and somehow, he felt she wouldn't either.